So as usual, Reaper has a ton of updates really fast, and I try to make a summary of some of the most important things that affect my workflow and some things that I think are useful for other people. So I have this series of videos of every 10 updates. I do a video talking about all of these features. If you want to check most of the times every single update, Reaper blog has videos on pretty much every single update. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and let's learn about the new updates in Reaper. Okay, so whenever you go into the changelog of Reaper, you will see that there are a ton of updates. And I don't think all of them are super useful. A lot of them are fixes, a lot of them are features that come and go. So I have a whole video on how to manage your sample library, and we will talk about the batch file item converter. So now on the render file that you can open using Command plus Option plus R, we also have a ton of new options on the new dialog. As I said, you can disable all of the post-processing here. You can see it's a really new window. Let's go from top to bottom, but I want to clarify that if you have any questions, just click on the post-processing help, and here's the extra description for any of those checkboxes that you might use. And what I really like to know, and it's super useful for me to know, is what's the processing order of this. So first it goes into trim leading, trailing, silence, path start, end with silence, then fade in, fade out, then normalizing the level, then the adjustment of the mono, and then limiting. We can, as usual, just normalize the file. It really depends on what you're working. This is not a video on how to normalize, on where to normalize. You can normalize now with a couple of new options. Normalize as if files play together, or as if play together and common gain. So there's a main difference there. When you're normalizing with common gain, it will adjust all of the files, absolutely all of the files together in a common gain, meaning that all of them will be moved by the same amount of dBs, instead of normalizing as if they were played together. So if they're played together, whatever is loudest is going to make the rest move in one direction or the other, but it's relative to the loudest or the softest one. But if you're applying a common gain, it's going to move all of them related to that peak or that lowest one. It's a different way of working. I honestly don't find way too much use for that in my type of work, but probably when you're handling some Foley libraries, this could be useful. This is a new option to adjust the mono files by an additional -3 or +3 dBs. Remember that in Reaper and in many DAWs we have the pan loss. So if I go into the project settings and I go into advanced and I'm not using pan loss at all, you can change the pan mode and the pan low so you can make for these losses and compensations. So that means that whenever you're bossing out, every time you're panning left and right, you could be losing 3 dB. That's something that might not fit your workflow. I don't use it because I don't want to be worrying about pushing the things again when I already pushed them far enough. And that's the main idea of working with the post-processing, with adjusting the mono files. Trim leading silence, this has to do with, if you have, for example, this really small part audio that has some noise floor right down here around 131 something, and you have this set at 120, it's not going to consider it audio, so it's going to consider it silence. This is just a small extra padding that you can add to the bounds of your files, so you don't get clicks and pops at the beginnings or ends. And of course, our always useful fade in and fade out. Still on the render to file, you will see that we have a ton of wildcards available. This is useful when you're making stems out of your session or you just want to save some sort of preset on how you want to export stuff. Under media items, we have lane. And whenever you're trying to export a ton of takes for someone that's not working in Reaper, this could be really useful if you're trying to just keep track of which lane was every single take that you did. You can also export with the takes or the take markers. So for example, remember that if you are adding lane and you are working with the comp lanes already, and this is lane 1, the file, this media item will be exported as one file with a 1 in it because it's called 1. But if I change this to, I don't know, comp 1, this is going to be exported as comp1 and so forth. That's the benefit of working with wildcards. I use it a lot, usually setting up something like track number, space track, something like track number, track, and probably the title, and probably the author. And something that's really useful always to have the tempo. So something like that could be useful for exporting files where you're done in a session and you're just making a multi-track out of a Reaper session. And if you keep getting lost, remember that the Save Settings button was moved to the left and it's no longer on the right. So on the render menu, we also have this new take marker. And take marker, I don't know if you're using them. They are useful. I have a shortcut set up for add take marker. So sometimes I listen to something and I don't want to jump into it right that moment. And I can just leave a note on the MIDI item itself. And I can make a small note that it can last for 1 bar, for example, if I'm wondering about 1 bar, or just leave a small mark there, however you want to use it. And that can be exported in the files. And when someone imports them again, or you import them again, you will see that note. Not only that, now we have... So do remember that also on the render menu window, we can now listen and play back to our rendered file with a different volume fader right here. It's easier to navigate this way. So this is probably the one that's most exciting for most people, and it's that we finally have stock phase align built into Reaper. So this is something I recorded for a record that I'm producing. This isn't balanced, but I am already in the mixing stage of the record. And you know how phase alignment is such a conversation in the audio world. I wouldn't obsess too much about it, not yet. So one of the things that concerns us the most is to know how these samples are related phase-wise. For example, not only this is a lot further back, because this is some triggering, and I have found some triggering plugins that actually, when you bounce them, they can make the sample end up further behind that you really need. So always check whenever you're triggering drums if the alignment of the sample matches the audio itself. So if I try to do this by hand, what I would look for is to probably try to match the noisy part of the sample with the noisy part of the sample, or the low end with the low end of the sample, in the case of the kick drum. And I have two different ones because this one has the overhead sound built in, and this one is the straight spot mic. So if I zoom in by holding Shift and up arrow key on the waveform, this is not changing the level of my sample. It's only letting me know or letting me see a lot better the waveform. I can try and match a lot better these peaks and try to avoid, for example, this line going way too hard above this 90 degrees. So as you can see, I have these two lines. This blue line, that's the cursor itself, and this other line that's yellowish that I can use to try and match the mouse position against the different waveforms. So this should work. If you go into Preferences, under Appearance, you can go into Display Vertical Line at Mouse Position. If I disable this, you'll see that whenever I move my mouse, I cannot see what I'm trying to match. And I feel like having this option on lets me edit a lot faster because I can have a fast reference of where I'm at and what I want to move in case I'm not happy with what I'm listening. So Phase Align now appears under the Actions menu. I added it to my toolbar and I did a small icon for it, and it's this one right here, Phase Align. And it's the simplest thing to use. Let me double these kick tracks, group these two. So these two here are the not aligned items, and these down here, I will just select both of them. It will analyze both of them, and I can decide which one is the reference by just clicking right here. You can change a couple of parameters. I will make a deeper video on the phase align stuff on its own, and I will calculate what is it needed, and it says it's going to move it a little bit, and it apparently didn't need to move it way too much. But again, this seems to be a great idea when you're working with multi-track recording. So especially with something like drums, I have tried it with other stuff, but again, that will be on the other video because this will be long enough. So I can just select all of my spot mics, and probably that's the best way to say it, and I will align all of them with my kick drum, and I will hit apply. And I will have two versions of it. On the left one, not aligned, and on the right, all aligned against my kick. And for me, the interesting result starts building up when you start trying alignment against different parts of drum set. So this one is being aligned against the overheads. And you will see that it's doing different amounts of alignment, but since the snares sample is being really off grid, I can just align these two first, and since it's saying it's hard to calculate this, I can just do it by hand, simply adding a marker, holding Option on my keyboard, dragging it in, and more or less trying to figure out what's going on. And probably this is one of the reasons why just triggering samples isn't a great idea just because you can do it. So in this scenario, for this video, I'm not going deeper into it. I will just mute the sampled snare, and let's just listen to the results of the three different versions. The first one being not aligned, the second one being aligned to the kick, and the third one being aligned to the overheads. And like, again, this is just a raw multi-track. This was before editing. So I'm just trying it in the most raw scenario to see what it would do. Honestly, it's great to have something like this. In case you forgot about it, we also have align takes on the RIA pack, and you can use this to align vocals. And now it has been also updated, so you can again manage a lot of the small details in it. A couple of updates on something that I didn't know existed, that's called the big clock, that you can find it on the action list. This I see people working on movies and short films and such from post that really need that big clock at sight. When you're trying to know in which minute, second, in which time frame you are, because usually when you're working in movies, you're working with these hours, minutes, second frames. So it can display that, and you can have that on a separate window, being as large as you want. There are a couple of interesting options that I see right here. For example, if you're working only in music, we usually only need to know the bars, where we're at, and there's an interesting feature right here where the big clock itself can now reflect the markers where you're at, and this is extremely useful. I love that. I have this minus infinite thing right here. Let me hit the options right here. And we have the window that displays all of the things that you can show on the big clock itself. You can have now 8 things at the same time. It has been updated. You could have less. You can show or hide any of them by clicking on the visibility checkbox. And you can add wildcards. Again, that's the really useful thing. So for example, if you are working here and we're working on the region A, let's call it like a big A section, and this is the B section, and I just want to set a random color to each one of them. Let's make this pink. And now whenever I'm moving across my project, I can always have some big information of where I'm at. Even if you have one of these small really thin horizontal screens at the bottom of your desk, you can have this lying at the very bottom of your desk or under your screen monitor, looking something like this, and you can add a couple of meters right there if you need it. I added the master peak, and I think this is really useful because I always want to know when I'm clipping or when I'm close to 0, because even though I know 32-bit float exists, I want to have some healthy gain structure things, and I just want to know how much I'm pushing it and how the levels are more or less related, even though I can listen to the differences. So I can see there's a couple of +1, +2, and I could change this one to, instead of showing just the master peak, I can add any other wildcard that I can think of that could be useful for my session. I don't know, if you're obsessed with loudness, you can also have the loudness set up there. And you can also just double click here and modify the markers and the regions. And if you double click at the back, you can modify all of the information that the big clock displays. A really small break telling you that if you have gotten so far down this video, I really appreciate if you think about subscribing, hitting the like button, or leaving a comment in the description so I can keep on making these videos for everyone to learn. And please stay on top of my YouTube channel and social media, because I will be making weekly classes open for everyone. Let's go back to the video. Moving on, we have the Crossfade editor window, and I'm using here the track properties free temp positioning shortcut. That way I can have, if this is something that fits your workflow, then go ahead and try it. If it doesn't, like, don't. So I can have different media items in one single track, and they will all play back from the same track. Since all of them are using only channels 1 and 2 for playback, all of them are going through channels 1 and 2 in my track. But sometimes when you're doing some layering of sound, even though you can do this multi-track, if you want to think of them more as one single thing, it could be useful to do it like this if it fits your mindset and the way you see things. So let's suppose for a moment that we have a couple of splits here and there on my file, and I go into the Show Crossfade Editor window, and I think there's a shortcut if you're in the default version of Reaper. I don't remember it, but like just look it up in the action list. So when I run this, now it looks different. It used to be different. It used to be like a couple of knobs, and I will add the screenshot of it. It was a ton of knobs for this, and it has a couple of beneficial things of how we can use it now. And the navigation between the crossfades is something that I think it's really important to be able to flow fast. So I can see that I'm editing from this one to this one. And if I have last clicked this Crossfade Editor window, if I just hit Option left and right, I can move between different clips and different media items and find their crossfades between each other. For me, this is a great way of working with the crossfades instead of having to do them right here. And going up and down with Option on your keyboard will make you move across tracks. But for example, whenever I do something like this, you can see all of my session is moving. Or I can add just a crossfade from here to here, and I move to a different one, and I can add another crossfade right here. But I'm looking at how the waveforms are adding up right here on the top part of the window, and I can phase align the samples again to the first position, or I can resync them, or even if I'm losing track of my window because I'm moving everywhere, I can just center again my screen right here. I think that's extremely useful. I saw John also show and talk about the snapshots. This is useful because, for example, you can have two different fades. For example, this one, save it with Command +1, this one and save it with Command +2, and try an A and B one version against the other. Like, that's useful. I don't really know how useful is it for me to have 4 snapshots. If you like it, use it. But the presets for me are far more powerful, and those have been around for a while now. So I can just load a preset of equal power, or you can make your own presets of very specific curves that you use on your crossfades. So moving on to envelopes, remember that if you hit V on your keyboard, you can display the volume envelope. And this used to behave super strange, and it wasn't on spot. So let's suppose you have like this different weird line just building across your session, right? And the envelopes were behaving kind of strange, and this goes along with the ripple editing that I just uploaded a video about ripple editing. But this was behaving super strange when you were moving stuff around with the regions, and the envelopes weren't behaving correctly. So now, for example, if I have, I don't know, something like this in a region, right? And I change my ripple editing mode by right-clicking and ripple edit all tracks, and have a MIDI item right here. And down below, I have some strange envelope going on, and I move my region. It wasn't necessarily obeying the time selection or the region selection. You can see it goes back to the envelope that we had right before, or if I duplicate it, now it's not acting strangely or not copying it properly. Even if I put this one in the middle, it's going to copy it just as it is, and it's not going to do anything super strange with it. So it's always moving relative. And for that, this option has to be on. Ripple edit affects all tempo map and affects envelopes on all of tracks. So if I just want to move with ripple editing per track, and I want to delete, I don't know, this part of the MIDI item, and I just want to move this envelope because it affects a parameter of a plugin in this one or the volume, now it's only moving this track, as you can see. If I change it to ripple edit all tracks, it's going to move both envelopes, right? But if I have ripple per track and I have the option affects all envelopes on all tracks and I delete this, like those kind of behaviors are the ones that we have to really be thinking about, because sometimes you might move something without knowing. And it's scary when you move things and you didn't know about that thing moving. So still on the ripple train of thought, it's important to talk about how ripple editing works when you're dragging from one media item into another. Because the whole idea of ripple editing is that if you delete something, whatever's further behind, whatever's further ahead is going to move towards the beginning, to the left of your screen. So if I have a split right here and I have these two media items and I drag this to the right, it's not shoving this media item anywhere. And if I drag this one from the right to the left, it's not shoving it anywhere. But if I enable ripple edit when editing media item edges, if I drag from the left to the right, I'm going to recover whatever is on this media item. But if I move from the right to the left, I'm not adding time or pushing it back. I can only push things further ahead, but I cannot go back in time moving this to the left. So probably you might want to recover things first and then just use option to adjust this second media item if necessary. We have also a really interesting feature that comes for bigger sessions when you have plugins that are generating a certain amount of plugin delay compensation. And I'm checking this on the performance meter under view, menu, and then performance meter. And I can also check this on the track manager where I can see that my auxiliary of addictive drums has a pre-delay compensation of 960 samples. So under the audio preferences tab, you can see that we now have auto bypass effects on record arm affected tracks whose pre-delay compensation exceeds a certain amount of time. You can decide that one. I think 5 milliseconds is more than enough extra space. So what this does is that, for example, I was recording this small melody right here. I have a really CPU heavy plugin right here that you can see 960 samples. And even when I arm this track, you will see that I'm not getting extra latency of anything. That's how I recorded it yesterday with this extra bus processing. But if I go into the addictive drums folder and I have any plugin inside of the folder that's CPU intensive, like really CPU intensive, it will bypass it, as you can see right here. So I can record without latency, without affecting my session, and whenever I play it back, I will have the full sound with all of my processing. That is a really, really workflow interesting idea. And I'm really excited to see how people are going to take advantage of it. Also remember that you have different ways of using plugins. So if you're using plugins after you record it and you're not using plugins on the FX in section of the track, and you can only see this extra, really small extra FX in when you have armed your track, and then you can select your FX track input window and you can add plugins here, or you can drag the plugin into the FX in. This, of course, if you're trying to record with something as sturdy as this plugin on the way in, it's going to cause latency. So probably add something like your preamp simulations in there, and any post-processing stuff, dynamic processing, and stranger stuff up top. So whenever you unarm your track, you can listen to the playback with all of that extra processing that you want to hear. Moving on to the MIDI editor, that I have a whole video on how to use and set up your MIDI editor and piano roll on Reaper, and I will link it in the description, is that remember that when you're looking at the piano editor, you have these extra lanes down here that you always want to check your CC7, that's the volume. You can always check your CC10, that's the pan. And if you're using a keyboard, remember that your 64 is your sustain pedal, that here it shows as a hold pedal, and that can make notes stick for a longer time than necessary. Not only that, for example, I have my push 3 down here, and I usually use that to add some MP expression to the instruments that I am playing. So now we have multiple CC per note on poly aftertouch lane. And the really interesting thing is that I can add different, even if you don't have an MP instrument, you can just draw it in. And you will see that I have an aftertouch for A4, an aftertouch for D4, and an aftertouch for B3. And if I select the 3 of them, I can see all of the aftertouch effects on all of them. And this is super interesting because maybe you're assigning that polyphonic aftertouch on your modulation matrix to something like filter. And now every single note can have a different filter. And it can also add panning to the sound. And again, like you can go crazy with this concept of poly aftertouch. And even if you can't play it, it's good to know that you can actually edit it from here. If you're using a lot of poly aftertouch, and for example, let's add another lane up here where I want to see velocity, and now I always want to see these 2 lanes, I can save this as a preset, and whenever I'm working on anything else, I can just right-click on the menu right here and load poly aftertouch and velocity and look at those 2. And this can go really well with loading actions and adding them maybe to your toolbar in your piano roll and having some presets. So maybe your preset 1 is nothing down here, your preset 2 is velocity only, and it depends on what you're working with. And that's a nice combination of how to make it faster for you. So for me, learning how to edit MIDI in Reaper has been quite an experience. And one of the fun things that I have tried to find is how to snap your notes when I'm trying to do things relative to read or not, even if I'm drawing them in with a mouse modifier. That, remember, you can always look for in the preferences, editing behavior, mouse modifiers, and MIDI piano roll. I have this setup right here if you want to copy it, because sometimes double clicking and adding a certain note of a specific length wasn't working. Sometimes I want to draw it in and I want it to obey and snap. If I don't have the snap set, you can see that I'm not being forced into the grid in any way. But if I have the snap on, I'm being forced a lot into the grid. Like I can only do these big movements. And I don't know, like working inside a grid works for MIDI programming. Don't forget to also turn on this option to autosave default CC lanes on Windows close. That way, whenever you're reloading anything, it didn't forget to save it just because you closed it. And now the MIDI chase finally follows also the polyphonic aftertouch. So there are a couple of other minor details that I want to show you. For example, when you're customizing and make your own toolbars, now you can just double click the icons down below and add your new icons. That's a lot faster. And that also works when applying those new icons. So for example, I have this push icon right here that I can use to detect my push 3 whenever I'm working, because I'm using the Driven by Moz extension add-on script. So now whenever you're working also on, this is going to seem jumpy, but like there are a lot of small things that aren't related. So whenever you're now in the track manager and you're scrolling up and down with your keyboard, you can just hit enter and set up as track 1. When we used to have to double click forcefully, and that's too slow for me. So remember that you can just do track 2, and this has been for ages now. You can hit tab and move from one track to another, and if you want to move back, you can hold shift and then tab and move back and forth as necessary. From the routing window that I usually use this shortcut, so I can open the routing window of the last touch track. You can now create a send to a new track or receive from a new track. Like, probably especially the send to a new track works best because like it's done, right? Like you don't have to do anything more. And now you can just rename it as, I don't know, reverb hole. Oh, yeah. For example, if you're working with some sort of sidechain compression or any sort of dynamic processing on your session, and I'm adding sidechain into these paths right here, and I'm adding it pre-fader post effects, so I can solo this and I can listen to the compression, and I have my RIA comp right here. Since I'm using it as a sidechain, I have to make myself sure that I'm receiving it into channels 3 and 4, so my compressor actually listens to it on my auxiliary inputs. And now it's on by default, this yellow line that shows the gain reduction per track. That you could also use when right-clicking and showing embedded UI on mixer control panel or track control panel. So for example, I can show it right here. And you will see that here, and now you can see that also on the graph on the track control panel, I have this yellow line of gain reduction. And if I hold Option, I can change the ratio of my compression. And by just dragging this slider, I can change the threshold of my compressor. This also works with gates and many other plugins that can be embedded in your session. But now this is on by default. I'm happy because I like to have that small visual feedback. Remember that when you were doing grouping parameters of different tracks, for example, these two, making them both part of the media eraser edit, and you have this small ribbon that shows up telling you that they are part of the same group, and they can both lead the edit and follow the edit. If you only edit one, they will both be edited at the same time. The only issue with this behavior is that if you're dragging from one of them, they both might get edited if you don't want it to. So now you can have on the options toggle item grouping and track media eraser edit grouping. This doesn't fit my workflow, but it's there. It's good for you to know that this can happen some way. And I remember talking about in one of my videos about how you can have like one master editing track, and this is how I edit my videos. So I'm working on one single track, and whenever I need to remove something and mute it on another track, I can just do it without any issue. But if I need to mute something on all of them, I can just go to the middle track and I am editing all of my tracks. Small extra information is that now up here on your transport bar, your tempo can reflect if you're working on quarter notes, eighth notes, and different subdivisions. Like that's useful. It also relates to the tap tempo, so you can tap tempo 8 notes and you will get a different result. I have also talked a little bit about regions, but let me show you one other thing. On the region manager, we have a couple of extra checkboxes down here where I can show regions, markers, take markers, or I can apply this only to selected items only. So for example, if I'm only showing my take markers on my region marker manager, you will see that unless I have them selected, they won't show up in the list. They will show up on the range view, but they won't show up in the list. If I have selected this media item, I have nothing here. But if I have the other media item that has take markers in it, they will show up right here. And you can navigate a lot faster through all of them. This is useful for my workflow. And for me, those are the biggest changes on the last 10 versions of Reaper. Reaper goes really fast with the updates. Try to find your workflow, as I have said so many times before. Finding your workflow in Reaper can only be done if you have projects that you're trying to get to. So for example, you're trying to learn how to record a drum set. You have to figure out everything about recording, track inputs, how to set up a toolbar for recording. In my case, I take a huge advantage of using this toolbar that I did for recording, where I can just change the track input from 7, 8, 9 or stereo pairs. And it's really fast for me because I have projects where I know more or less what are the steps that I have to do on every single session, and I can just run through them really fast by building toolbars. I will link that video also in the description. So I hope these kind of videos are really helpful for you. I've been trying to build my channel around workflow stuff, not only across this does that, thinking about larger projects and larger situations. Like that's the way I like to teach. That's the kind of thing that I like to teach. And I hope this is useful for you. Be sure to check out the rest of my videos. You might find something interesting, something for your workflow. And if you don't, leave me a comment and I'll try to figure out if in my schedule I can make a video on that specific topic. If you like this, I want to remind you that videos aren't sponsored at all, but I do appreciate your help. I have a Buy Me a Coffee link down below. If you want to support my work, I really appreciate it. If you don't, that's fine. Just leave a like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, or do any of those things that people on YouTube say. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and thanks for listening.